Okay, hello and welcome everybody to today's meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. I've got two apologies down, so Mark Kirkham and Councillor Ashley Mason, who's substituted by Councillor Healy. So thank you for that. We've also got in attendance remotely Mark Outside, who's the Senior Manager at Mazars, and I think everybody else is present and correct. But ask first if there's any declarations of interest. If not, I'll make a few ordering changes to the agenda. So I'll move agenda item 2 to after agenda item 7, because it seems to make more sense to discuss whether or not we should exclude the public after we've considered the report about the extent to which we should do that. I'll also move items, I think it's 8, 9 and 10 before item 6, and that'll just help free up officer time, because I'm assuming the longest item will be agenda item 6. So if we can move on then to the minutes and action log of the last meeting, if there's any issues to raise with those. I noticed that Mr. Lee's in twice in the present section. If anybody else has got any comments. If not, I just had a question that it's probably worth asking, because I don't think it comes up anywhere else, which is just in relation to the advertising of the second independent member. I think in the minutes of the last meeting it says the advert was being prepared and the position would be advertised shortly. If there's any update on that, it'll be worth reporting.
We received 2 applicants. Sorry. Yes, Chair, we received 2 applicants for the role. We've conducted interviews last week, and as a result, we've selected a suitable appointment, and a report's now being prepared for council for their formal appointment to the role.
Okay, thank you. That's good news. Any other issues? That's the only. So if we're happy with those, then I'll sign them as and when. I might just hold off signing them until after we've listened to the public participants, though. Yeah, Councillor Rose.
Are actions part of the minutes, or are they a separate bullet point?
I think they're part of the same agenda item, aren't they?
I think they're part of the same agenda item, but I haven't clocked. Sorry. Just checking on action 8 was around the LGA recommendations report, and it said November 23 on it, but I didn't spot it in the agenda today. So just wondered if there was an update on that.
Yes, certainly, Chair. Unfortunately, it's not yet at a stage that it's ready to be brought back. Unfortunately, you'll be aware that obviously we have a number of officer vacancies. And in essence, the assistant director who's preparing the report simply hasn't had time to do so. We would hope that it'd be ready for the next meeting, following the next ordinary scheduled meeting. But as I say, it's just a question of capacity.
Yeah.
And I think that increasingly that's an issue for all officers across the council.
Yeah. Is it okay to update the date on the action? Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If we move on then to agenda item 4, which is public participation, and our first speaker is Andrew Mendes. And if you'd like to, presumably a space set up. Thank you. And you'll know you've got 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll try and remember to give you a 30-second warning. Apologies in advance.
Good evening, everybody. As the one who didn't get the post on the independent members, all I can say is you've got a fantastic appointee, whoever he is, because he's better than me. Right. So thank you for having me. Firstly, on item 9, no purchase order, no pay. Thank you, Chair, for arranging for this report to be produced. I've given detailed and I hope constructive feedback directly to Helen, but I would urge you to support Helen in strengthening her action plan. Instead of using words like consider, review, and consult, you should endorse moving to something stronger and insist that Ian Floyd, the chief officers, and whoever else tell their staff to make change happen. I would also urge you to request a follow-up directly to Audit and Governance in, say, 9 months' time to find out whether it actually has made a difference. Meanwhile, in item 6, constitutional changes, I note the contrast between the extremely comprehensive contract procedures and the reality of the payment process that I've just talked about. A&G looked at contract management in December 2019, and the procedure published here seemed to be sensible tidying up of a policy that, so far as I've seen, works quite well. COSE puts big checks and hurdles in contract raising and seems to manage them effectively, but then seems to allow payments without much by way of discipline or control. My mother used to use a Welsh phrase, all fur coat and no knickers. There's, I think, a danger that this is in you don't have to minute that. There's a danger that this might be what's happening currently. And then I would finally like to come back to a familiar subject, and one which again is on the agenda today, which is the publication of internal audit reports. Very disappointed to see the paper, but it's not my debate. But I do hope that A&G members realise their responsibility in scrutinising and challenging audit reports and insisting that their findings are followed through. If you agree today that reports are not published to the public, then it's only you that has visibility of the findings. While I have high regard for the investigative efforts of Veritao over the several years I've been involved, the example of today's no purchase order, no pay report sadly demonstrates that they cannot or will not follow through on their findings and recommendations. While council management, GRAG or whatever, similarly doesn't seem to take on this role as I thought they would. It's almost as if there's a concerted effort to keep such issues away from scrutiny. It's up to you as elected members, along now with 2 independents, to keep the audit part of audit and governance alive. At a time when costs are under continuing pressure, identifying and fixing problems with administrative procedures should be a clear objective for you, the Chief Operating Officer or Head of Paid Service or whatever, whichever bit of the Constitution you read.
It's 30 seconds.
Yeah. And apart from the specific orders around purchase orders, and there are several others that I've been involved in, it's telling how many follow-up actions from other audit recommendations have not been implemented. And for Max's report, of course, you don't know what they are. As part of this increased vigilance, I would also ask you to question again Veritao's interpretation of reasonable assurance. Look at the risk management report today. I can't, of course, but is the complete abandonment of Majik reasonable? From the synopsis I can see, I doubt it. Thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Right, our next speaker is Brian Watson. You're able to join us at the table, please. And similarly, you'll know you've got 3 minutes to address the committee, and I'll give you a 30-second warning.
Thank you, Chair. As you remember, I came to the last Audit and Governance Committee meeting in September and talked about the civic party, the role and the support of. I've no grumbles with the minutes that have been taken, and I've no grumble with yourself, Chair, because you actually sent me a letter with some reply on it. But the point is that there's nothing in tonight's minutes that refers back to me asking these questions. Now, in my day and age, there used to be replies from the officers. And I think that's absolutely essential, because if and when this occasion arises that it comes up again, which it will do, there will be nothing to say that it was raised at that meeting. And there is no reply to refer to. Everything could be considered as hearsay, even the letter from yourself, hearsay, with no confirmation behind it at all. And that's what I'm very disappointed at. And actually, I hope that that'll be rectified by the next Audit and Governance at least. And thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for your reply as well.
Thank you. So in the minutes we've got, there is reference to you speaking.
Yeah.
Is there something you're saying that's missing that should be there?
No. That summed up what I was saying. I think there's one little thing mixed off with, which was something about the drivers. But there's nothing in the report tonight that refers to that speech of mine
Okay.
at all, and no answer from anyone else but yourself.
Okay, well, we'll have a look and see if we can find further answers. I know that there's a report, I think, which is going to an executive member decision session on civic party, so that might be the best
Right.
place to feed in sort of thoughts.
Dare I ask when that will be?
Oh, I think it's down to go to a decision session in January.
Yeah, that could be all right.
So I think,
once it gets across to April time, it's too late, you know,
okay.
as I know and you know yourself.
Yeah, so I'll pass on to you the details of the exec member, and perhaps if you sort of get in touch with her and pass on your thoughts that way, that's probably the best
Okay.
approach at this stage.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. So I think then if we can move on to item 5, which is the corporate governance performance report. I'll say generally this is a very long agenda, so I don't mind quite short introductions, and you can probably assume we can take the papers as read. So it's more if there's anything you'd particularly like to highlight, or any updates is probably sort of the best approach, or we'll be here all night, I think.
Good evening. My name is Lorraine Lunt. I'm the Council's Information Governance and Feedback Team Manager and Data Protection Officer, Records Manager, etc. And as some of you have had the pleasure of attending, the Covert Surveillance RIPA and CHIS coordinator for the Council that supports the Council's compliant use of those investigatory powers. Just to be very brief then, further to the report and the item number, sorry, I'm just scrolling, sorry, I should have been prepared. Around item number 7, the ICO enforcement notice for overdue FOI and EIR responses. Just to give you an update, because at the date of writing the report, we hadn't completed it, but I can confirm that we have now completed and sent valid responses to all 261 overdue responses from the ICO's enforcement notice. As you are also aware, we've published the improvement plan, and it's one of the annexes here tonight. And so we have now complied with the ICO's enforcement notice. We've confirmed with them, they've responded with, that's a positive result. They may also update their own website to show that we have complied with their enforcement notice, but I'll share that link if and when that happens. The other points of note are to look at the ombudsman cases. I have supplied the responses to the questions and queries that were raised at the last Audit and Governance Committee I was at, and I hope that the report answers those queries, but obviously I'll take any more. The Housing Ombudsman Service decision, where it was severe maladministration with action and recommendations, as you will see in the annex, there was a considerable monetary recompense paid and remedy to the individual. As you will see, some of the content and detail shows it's around disrepair and maintenance. And this is just to pre-warn committee that with the rise of housing disrepair, especially no win, no fee solicitors chasing customers, and also the Housing Ombudsman Service strengthening their code of practice, etc., and the cases that they're taking on, that it is likely that we will see more complaints being escalated into the Housing Ombudsman Service, quite rightly, if that's what the complainant has the right to do. And we will obviously update and report these to committee as and when we get any cases and decisions. The other point from the report, just very briefly, is that following this evening's training on covert surveillance, either comments and feedback and what you want to see in the report this evening, or happy to be emailed with your suggestions after I send out the 2 slides showing what the trainers' recommendations were that would come to an Audit and Governance Committee as an annual report.
Okay, well, thank you. And it's good to hear about the, I guess, the resolution of the FOI issue. And I'm sure, notwithstanding how we got there in the first place, it's been a huge task to fix that. So I think, you know, passing on thanks certainly from myself, and I'm sure from the committee, to the members of the team that have presumably, you know, done a job over the past few weeks to get us back where we should be. So thank you. Questions from the committee, Councillor Fisher?
Thank you, Chair. I'm obviously very pleased that we've now caught up on the FOIs, and you know, massive thanks to the team, because I think a lot of people have busted gut to get to that situation. But it does concern me that the matter of the backlog of FOIs was never brought to Audit and Governance and reported to us, because I've been on this Audit and Governance Committee since 2019, and it was never reported that we're in that position. I really do wish that in future, can we have, you know, accurate forewarning that this situation is arising, because it was a bit of a shock to me as somebody who's a veteran of this committee.
Okay. Is that something that's part of the action plan to?
It most certainly is. The current reports and details that you get and that are also put onto your open data were from previous discussions and agreements of what people wanted to see, etc. But I completely understand that just seeing a percentage and a volume or a figure for out of time does not explain properly and or fully to yourselves and to the public whether that means the response has been sent or not sent, or how late the response was. We are working with the business intelligence team to look at how we can pull those details out for you and how those will be presented. And it's likely that it'll be responses that are out of time, because we will still have to report that those are out of time. But then how many are still out of time at 30 days, 40 days, 50 days, 60 days, so we can track that, and also chase where we need to pick up with the service area the importance of getting these responses out in the statutory, at least in the statutory timeframe. So yes, it's historical reasons and requests why the reports and the data figures look as they are, and also my apologies for not explaining that out of time includes where there's been no response.
Thank you.
Could I just, one of my bugbears is about control documentation, because with very large agendas, you've got to rely on the control documentation. And looking at page 49, there's a couple of target implementation dates again, and there's a comment raised by another member of the committee earlier. And it says, solution in place, but improvements are required. And that's a very open-ended statement without an additional review date. You know, how significant is it that improvements are required? Following the last comment about not knowing that there had been a big backlog of something growing, how do you know how significant are the improvements to make the solution satisfactory? I'm not asking for a specific answer. What I'm saying is, on the control documentation, to give assurance to the committee, it's useful to know, we say this has happened, we say some things are missing, and here is the date by which we believe they will be achieved. And that then allows a follow-up question at that date. Has it been achieved? Why hasn't it been achieved?
So you made reference to page 49 and also the wording and showing that there is a date for review and or outcomes that aren't just ongoing pieces of work. I shall update the improvement plan to ensure that you can see progress and also where there is a completed outcome. So I'll add in additional columns after the status or in the relevant place. There is a full action plan, because on the improvement plan there's lots of actions that we have to take that sits under that. So my work plan, and I will track over some of those columns and information so that you can see that in the next report.
Yeah, Chair, if it had simply said minor improvements are required, that's fine. But it just says improvements are required, and you don't know how significant the improvements are. because the committee are not going to go delving back down into every individual supporting document to answer that question.
I shall look at making sure that there's something other than a priority that explains that to committee better. If it's possible, I may, if that's okay, if I email you after or through the week to just get some ideas and put options. Is that
I'm always happy to mislead you on any issue, but it's just a generality. It's also
Okay.
what you can cope with internally.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll put some options forward and see what looks best at next committee report.
Thank you. And is it the intention to report back to us very regularly on sort of progress on this?
I'm booked in, I believe, on the work forward plan in January next. I'm not sure. Sorry.
Okay.
But if I need to provide a verbal or a further or another one, I'll discuss with Bryn and the work planners. I think it's January.
It might be February, but I
Okay.
suspect that will be fine.
Okay.
Unless anybody's going to argue. Sorry, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. With regard to the two cases of maladministration, there's a fairly large number of remedies recommended. I don't know the circumstances, but if there are any staff training issues relating to the maladministration, have those staff training issues, staff training been given to ensure that this doesn't happen again?
Not only where the Ombudsman recommends that there's an either increased or more regular training and or content of training, it is something that we look at as part of the complaints team on lessons learned and themes and learning from themes. And from the attendance at team meetings, we will either do a formalised session, training session, and record the content and the attendees, etc., as that as part of also meeting one of our internal audit recommendations to keep a full training and awareness log so that we can identify and evidence where we may still have gaps going forward. There's also training that we can bring in from the Ombudsman's website and point people in the direction of that. Both the Housing and the Local Government Social Care Ombudsman provides those resources, so we utilise them as much as possible. So not only where the Ombudsman decision recommends the training is looked at, it will be looked at as part of the lessons learned and actions coming out of the internal investigation complaint.
Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I got a few points. I guess one of the points off the back of the sort of strength of language on it, I'm slightly concerned by the phrase continuing non-compliance with section 1 of FOIA and continuing breach of section 10. And yes, the backlog is part of that, but also when we're looking at the numbers of the percentage of FOIs completed in time, it's all 80 to 85% going back years, and there's some improvements in some of it, but what I don't know is what that threshold of acceptability is, internally and externally. So I can see the trends and I can see year to year. The ditto for the other numbers on there, obviously. So the numbers vary. Data Protection Act 64%, but should we be at 99% and we're failing massively? Should we be at 50% and we're succeeding really well? What should we be expecting? And is there a way of having some marker on that in future, just to? And also, I guess, comparing us to other local authorities, if it's everybody that's struggling in the same way, then that's more understandable. But I guess there's a lack of context for what exactly I'm looking at on those numbers.
So to take, hopefully, and if I miss any of your points, please let me know. So I'll start with benchmarking against other local authorities. We're one of the most open and transparent councils in the figures that we do publish on our FOIs and EIRs and data protection requests and rights of individuals requests. In getting the approval of other either neighbouring or geographical neighbours, I'm in a number of information governance groups across the region, both North Yorkshire, East Links and West Yorkshire, and getting approval and agreement on how people calculate, and so that we can compare apples with apples instead of apples and pears, And also an indication of number of requests received is not an indication of a council being open and transparent. It just means that's the number of requests that we receive, because we still have to answer an FOI or EIR request. Even if we've already published that information, we still have to log it and manage it and maintain it. So benchmarking, we have been trying for a number of years to get that information to you. We used to be able to provide you and share with you information through the West Yorkshire Law group. However, I've not had or received those recently over the last maybe year or so. So benchmarking can be slightly different. What we are looking at, and one of the information governance groups, is to try and give a bit more context both to the public and yourselves as elected members of what actually the numbers on FOIs and EIRs and SARs actually mean. So for example, you might have 10 FOIs, but there might only be one question or one piece of information asked in each of those FOIs. If, however, on those 10 FOIs, there's 20 questions each, that's a different level of information, etc., that we need to respond to. So we're looking at, can we pull that information out and report that better? So alongside not just the numbers of requests that we've received, but how many questions does that equate to? The same on the subject access requests to records. What those do show a decrease in the number received. However, what there has been is an increase in the complexity, and that may be due to a young person or adult wanting their whole care record or foster care diaries, etc. That's quite a number of pages and complex information to go through. So we're also looking at how we can show better whilst we may only have 50 SARs coming in or a decrease in SARs, the number of pages that we're having to retrieve and look through. The other part of the question on the percentage being a good or a bad figure, ideally, because it is legislative led, that we should be at 100%. However, with the discussions that we've been having with the ICO group manager, he set us, and I think I reported that in one of my previous reports, the target of reaching X amount within being responded to in time. 95% is usually their aim for their target. Anything other than that, they will look at that figure. They will also look at the number of cases that are raised directly to them to look at putting you on what they call their evaluation and or monitoring. So ideally, yes, 100%. The stretch target set by the ICO and agreed with the ICO is upwards of 95%. We did manage that. I think it was the last time was about pre-COVID. However, and we continue to slowly make incremental changes. However, as you will all be aware, resource capacity, budget, finance, etc., all adds to people needing to look at their priorities and the business as usual that they have to provide, etc. So there is a balance there to be made. But yes, I'll put some further detail on the bottom of the annexes so that that's clear going forward.
That'd be useful, thank you. Councillor Rose?
Yeah. Thank you for that, and noting that the EIR numbers are 97% the most recent quarter, and we haven't been on that on any of the other numbers on here. We're obviously trending the right way, so hopefully that continues. And thank you for that full answer as well. I guess one other question on the same thing. It's not a number that I can see on here, but to what extent are people satisfied with the answers they receive? Is a response just a response? Obviously, I appreciate that if it's 90% and the 10% we never get back to, it's bad. We're now getting back to them. But are we getting back to them satisfactorily with the actual answer that they're wanting? Maybe that's one to take away rather than discuss here, but
I can hopefully answer you. On every FOI and EIR response, we are obliged by the legislation to advise people of the right, if they're dissatisfied with their response in any way, that they have the right to request a review. And or then if they are dissatisfied with the further response that they get at a review stage, that they can then go to the ICO. That's the route in the escalation. So you can take an inference from the number of reviews that are on the lists. What number is it? one of the numbers, that's an expression of dissatisfaction with their original response.
Thank you. Councillor Millie.
Thank you, Chair. The ICO gave the authority an indication that they were intending to issue the enforcement notice before they actually did it, didn't they? Was that a matter of days or weeks, or what sort of timescale notice did they give?
We've been working with the ICO group manager over, it's probably about 18 months now. He is going around all the local authorities. He meets regularly with a lot of local authorities, FOI and corporate governance teams, etc. The prior notice was that we had worked with them on identifying the overdue backlog, and he went away and discussed it with his colleagues. We also had short notice of their issuing of the formal enforcement notice, but it was kept on. They had to issue a signed enforcement notice. I couldn't disclose that information until they'd issued the full signed enforcement notice, because it can result in contempt of court, and they had to release that first. So there was no prior warning in that sense of the actual enforcement notice going live.
Just, well, at the last meeting, we were told that the authority was expecting an enforcement notice to be issued. So it was okay to tell us publicly that a notice was going to be issued. Sorry. I'm just wondering. I'm just sharing concerns. I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was who said it earlier. Concerns that we weren't aware of this, and then obviously since the last meeting, we found out that the notice was issued the next day. Like we were told the night before. I'm just wondering why we were told, so last minute, basically as last minute as was possible. Members of this committee only found out the night before the public found out.
As I say, I'm bound by the instructions from the ICO on their release of the signed enforcement notice. I can go away and take your query and ask the ICO group manager that we're working with on just that time lapse and escalation, and then reply back to you.
Okay, I think that would be useful to set it out exactly what the timescale was at each stage. I think that would be helpful.
Chair, the pressure on resources, which you mentioned a couple of times, do we monitor how many requests we reject as being too complex and requiring too much time? Do we have policies that we should review? In other words, should we be, I don't know, should we be rejecting more or less as being too complex? Would that make a difference to the resources which are available for anything else? Or would it just cause immense stramash, as the Scots might say, and not actually produce any efficiency gain?
Unfortunately, you have to accept an FOI request, or you have to recognise what is an FOI request, or a request for any information that we hold in a recorded form. So we can't refuse it under complexity. We would still have to, so there's a time and cost limit in the legislation. And if there is potentially a request that would take us over a certain number of hours to do, etc., we still have to do the work to do the calculation in the example and provide that information back to the requester. So yes, it might take us less time to do that response, but there is still time and resource needed to do that response. But it's very limited use of the cost and time limit exemption in FOI, because it's only for a certain number of things. It's not for going through what you retrieve and what you look through. It's only usually around printing and postage, etc. It's not a well used or often used exemption.
Okay, Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. Following up Councillor Leeds' point and your statement about contempt of court, if you received this on the 13th and you weren't allowed to tell anyone because that would make you in contempt of court, why was the committee told on the 12th?
Sorry, no, if I misled you in my previous comment, not complying with the details and the recommendations made in the enforcement notice would lead to a contempt of court. What I'm saying is that I was advised, and on the discussions with the group manager from the ICO, that they don't want it sharing or disclosing in its entirety until they can provide us with the signed enforcement notice. And that's why you were advised the day before it was going onto their press website. We were able to do that. But as I say, I will go away and check with the ICO group manager, and I will provide you with a written response and or either at the next report to those questions from both Councillor Melly and yourself.
Yeah, because it's then, is it a day? Is it 2 days? Is it 3 days? Is it a week? Is it a month? So yeah, I'd assume it would either be the 13th or at any point. Anyway, I'll let you come back to the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think a clear timeline would help. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, unrelated points. One quick point, which is we've got the link out to where you can go and look at the data in open data. There are 209 documents in this one section. It becomes quite hard to then open them and look at them compared to a table of data, and I wonder whether we can consolidate those down. I appreciate that's not an easy ask, and there's no specific suggestion for how we might group them, but I'm aware that we've had conversations before around the public trying to actually access and understand and use the data, not just that there is loads there if you know where you're looking. So just wanted to raise that point, if that's okay.
I continue to work quite closely with the business intelligence team. Obviously, I can only comment on the areas in the data that from my service area, but I'll certainly reiterate those comments and looking at, is there any other way, and at least if I can present it differently to yourselves in audit and governance report.
I wonder whether there's some work for us to do in delegating to a smaller group, looking at the totality of our data that's currently publicly available and that's usable by us. If we're supposed to be scrutinizing that data, I currently don't think I can. But if we've got thousands of metrics in one document, that isn't necessarily helpful either. So I know we've had this conversation before, but I just wonder whether there's something we take offline on that one to, it's not something we could do in one of these meetings.
Yeah, I think perhaps something to go away and think about how best we might approach that, and perhaps bring a suggestion to the next meeting and then take it forward in sort of parallel with what's going on more broadly, I guess, and both look to come back with something perhaps in February at that meeting, sort of try and bottom it then. That might be a useful thing to do. I'm not sure what the best way of doing that would be, but perhaps if we discuss offline and come to the next meeting with an idea, then that might be the best approach.
Great, yeah. Thanks. Two other questions, both around the improvement plan, if that's okay. The first is that there's a point around the corporate governance team structure being reviewed by the end of November. Is that something that we're going to see the output of here? How does that end as an action? Is it just that it's being reviewed and everyone goes, great, the review's finished, we've made the changes we were going to make anyway? Or is there something tangible that we see as an output from that? And just to ask the second question and get it done with at the same time, there's a point further down around third parties and clauses in third party contracts that may cause us limitations. Do we know what the scale of that problem is today and what it looks like in terms of chance of success of being able to close out those challenges with these? I'm no fool in terms of how easy it is to resolve existing contract things where we want to change something the other party might not want to. So what does that look like in practice on those two?
At the end of November, for the review of the corporate governance teams and the structure that looks at and works on the information governance side, what that will look like is that there'll be options and considerations sent into my line management structure, because then there will obviously be, if there are any changes or suggested to follow through on, there'll be the employee HR process, etc., to go through. So at the point of the date on the improvement plan, it will just be that we'll have completed that look and that review and come up with some options. So what will happen with the improvement plan as we reach dates, etc., my although the ICO's enforcement notice was just publish an improvement plan, I do intend to publish updates and update by deadlines, etc., onto the council website page, but then also provide you with a full update at next report in January, February time. But yeah, it'll just be that we'll have completed what might the options be, are there any changes, or is the corporate governance team as it needs to be? And please can I, third party contracts. So where we're working on with both procurement and within legal services on new contracts coming into place is making sure that we have covered off and there is an understanding that the council may be asked an FOI and or an EIR, not just for the services or the system that they're supplying, but also about the contract itself. And making sure that that's set out very clearly in the contract. I don't know at this point in time the size of the number of contracts that are in existence that may not have the full robust clause in it around FOIs, but if there was any queries, either the service area could come to us and ask for the advice on how we should approach the third party contractor to come to an agreement and explain about why and what it is under the FOI. We tend to and try to always ask the third party if they have any concerns about anything being released under FOI or EIR. However, it does land on the council's decision, has the final decision on what can and can't be disclosed. But we try to always ask what their concerns might be if it's not already in the public domain.
Okay. Can't see any further questions, so thank you for your time this evening. Thank you. We'll move on then to item 8, which starts on page 359. Appreciate we're going slightly out of order.
This is the treasurer. Are we on the treasurer review?
Yes.
That's right. Just lost my place in the agenda temporarily. Thank you.
What, 360?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this is the Treasury Management Mid-Year Review for your scrutiny prior to it being considered by executive next week. Be aware that the executive agenda has been published today. So if you did have any comments or feedback or concerns, I would update executive verbally on those concerns. Hopefully reasonably straightforward for you to scrutiny, because it's kind of pretty steady away, business as usual. We've not undertaken any new borrowing in the period. We're just keeping a kind of a steady watching brief really in terms of interest rates, investments and so on. We continue with our usual policy of managing our funds on the basis of security, liquidity and yield. So that's still a very cautious, risk averse approach to treasury management. I'll leave it there.
Okay, just ask if anybody's got any questions or points they'd like to make. Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks again, Debbie, for these reports. I want to bring up on page 367.22, referring to the average levels of cash balances that we have for investment purposes in our portfolio. Obviously, there's that drop of approximately £28 million. Further on in 24, it's pointed out that this is being used mostly, this is due to result of use for capital projects rather than costly borrowing going forward. Is there any concern about this reducing the level of reserve that we have, you know, disproportionately, and whether or not borrowing might be a better option to do that? I understand that the borrowing, due to the rising interest rates, borrowing is less attractive than perhaps it previously was, but dropping by nearly half is also a significant thing to bring attention to. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So it's slightly confusing in some of the terminology, but this is about cash in the bank. So the reserves remain the reserves. Right. They are what they are. This is about the kind of day-to-day cash that you've got in your current account almost. And so what we do is we deliberately keep that, sort of run that down and keep that low, because we don't want to hold a lot of cash, because you don't get a lot. We're not putting it in high yield, high risk investment portfolios. We're putting it in banks, UK banks and building societies mainly. And so you're right, there is that balance between when do we borrow and when do we run our cash reserves down. So running our cash reserves down has served us well to date. I would like interest rates to drop before we borrow again, but we keep a very close eye on it. It's a daily task to look at what cash we have in the bank, as you would expect. We might have to borrow before the end of the financial year. I'm hoping that we don't have to because interest rates are high, so I'd rather not. With the benefit of hindsight or a crystal ball, you maybe would have borrowed a couple of years ago. We had that discussion, I think, at this committee, didn't we, Councillor Fisher, about when we should borrow. But if you borrow, there's a cost of carry. So as soon as you borrow, you have to start paying interest on that borrowing. So we take the advice from our Treasury advisors quite closely. But yeah, we look at it daily. So it's not a cause for concern in terms of financial resilience or financial robustness. But from an operational point of view, obviously, we need to make sure we've got enough cash in the bank to pay our bills. And so if we get to a point where we're thinking, okay, we need to borrow, then we'll borrow. We've got provision in the strategy to borrow. We were always expecting to borrow. We know that we are under borrowed, but that's like I say, an operational day-to-day decision. Does that answer your questions?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor?
Me again, thank you, Chair. So very next page, point 30, just referring to the fixed term investments available as of the 30th of September. I can see that there are most of it is in money market funds, as is standard practice, I understand. Also, we've got cash in the bank as well. Just a couple of points on this. When it comes to cash on the bank, is the average rate of 0% standard? Is there not some sort of rate that we could receive on that additional money? And also I note that we've got fixed term deposits and call and notice accounts which provide a higher interest rate as well, but we haven't chosen to use them at this stage. Just wanted to sort of raise those two questions on that table, please.
Yeah, again, yeah, really good points. We don't, I guess in common with most of your sort of personal banking, you tend not to get interest on your current account generally. I know some way you do. We can have another look at that actually and talk to our bank about whether there's something we can do around that. We do deliberately try and keep that just enough to cover what payments we think are going out that day, really, and try not to leave any money lying around in there. We don't always get that perfectly right. In terms of the call and the notice accounts, again, we've been trying to keep cash very liquid because we know we're running low on our cash balances, and it all depends on the speed of how we fund the capital programme, so how quickly schemes progress. What, you know, as you can imagine, lots of different payments going out of the bank account every day. And you won't have seen because the reports have just been published today, but when you look at exec reports for next week, you'll see on the Capital Monitor, again, we've slipped, I think it's around £12 million again that we've slipped on to future years for various reasons. So that's all money that you would think that we'd be borrowing ready to fund that 12 million, but then it slipped. So if we'd done that, you know, we'd have the money that we didn't need, kind of thing. We'd have the cost of carry. So that's just been around our uncertainty about our cash flow, really, and our profiling of expenditure. So we've again talked, I think, at this committee before about the need to improve our profiling and push our managers to say, if you've got a capital programme scheme for £5 million, when exactly is that £5 million going to be spent? And that's obviously very challenging for some schemes to know exactly when that's going to be spent. So we need to look at making sure we can improve our cash flow forecasting to make the best use of those higher on-call accounts.
Okay. So further question.
I'm going to be infuriating, Chair, and ask one final question, but hopefully it will be a relatively quick one. So 2 pages over, page 373.42. So that is for the Public Works Loan Board certainty of borrowing rates. I understand that these are projections, but as far as I can tell on all of the projections, there's a negative yield curve. I might be getting this wrong, but the shorter, so that means the if we're borrowing for only 1 year, it actually costs us less in terms of interest than we borrow for 50 years. Usually, as I understand it, that's the other way around, particularly in things like government bonds. I just want to know why we've got this sort of negative yield curve going forward, if possible.
I'm not sure I can answer that because this is the published PWLB certainty rate. It's not something we have any, it is what it is. It depends on all the government bonds and other factors. and my knowledge of that doesn't extend quite to maybe answering that question, but I can take that one away and have a look. You're right. Shorter term borrowing is usually more expensive than the longer term. It depends really on what it is. So yeah, I can take that one away. That's okay.
Apologies for getting too nerdy on that. Thank you, Chair. No more questions.
Can't see any further questions. If we're happy then to move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 9, which is the update on the no purchase order, no pay process. That starts on page 381. But I think we're joined by Helen Mallam, who's the principal accountant. So if you'd like to just give us a quick update, I guess.
Yeah, a brief overview, yes. So hopefully the report provides you with an update that was requested at the last meeting or the meeting before that. As a follow-on to the audit findings about retrospective purchase ordering that goes on at the council. What I've sought to do in the report is follow on to the fact that the audit highlighted that in the last year, 2022, up to 55% of orders were made retrospectively. So that means that the commitments are not being made at the time an order is placed. So in response to that, we as officers, we've agreed 4 actions to the audit. And I've gone through within the report each action in turn. So that's covering reviewing the policy, providing training, reviewing the role of business support within purchase ordering, and reviewing our list of exemptions. So I've provided a work plan at Annex A with a set of timelines. And my intention is we'll go through that work plan and come back with an update in March 2024. So I'm kind of asking for comments about the work plan, if there's any feedback, and yeah, whether March 2024 works as an update timeline.
Thank you. I'll just ask if there are any comments or questions.
Well, if I'm a member of staff in the council who does this action, which is against policy, apart from training, is there any sort of consequence to my continued bad behavior? Because we don't have like performance bonuses, so it can't be like this is going to affect your bonus, or is there any sort of HR type management feedback loop?
No, presently there isn't. It's not a case of us having a list of offenders, if you like, of people who are not following the policy. It would be discovered through review and through the audit, and I suppose that's what's happened. There isn't a consequence in answer to your question.
Okay, because this has gone on for years, hasn't it? It's not suddenly we've done an ad hoc review, we've noticed a problem, we've put in an action. It's consistent behaviour that's against sound financial management.
Yeah, it's a fair point, and I think since we introduced the policy in 2013, certainly at that point there was a good uptake and adherence to the policy. Over the course of the last 10 years, there's been turnover of staff. The training messages perhaps got slightly lost in how the policy should be followed and how purchase orders are raised on the system. So there has been a slight deterioration, yes, in the adherence to the policy. So that's what we want to address.
If I could just come in briefly, Chair, that Helen's right, but the other, I mean, the ultimate sanction would be as part of it's almost failure to follow the financial regulations, which could be considered a disciplinary matter if it was raised and repeatedly ignored. We would escalate that through the line management structure, and we would consider it under a kind of HR misconduct type of process.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to specifically ask around the background, because I understand there is on point 7, page 382, is that there are some cases, and understandable cases, where there is an exemption where this does not need apply. I note that there is an exemption to this. I was wondering if there's a proportion perhaps of overall purchases or money spent that might come under this exemption route, whether they make a significant portion. I understand that's a very detailed question. I'm happy to receive an answer later, but
Yeah, we could do some analysis of it. I don't actually have that data. The exemptions themselves were initially, they came into a number of categories. Either it was a type of supplier, be that utilities, because that's difficult to raise a purchase order for, I know the supply, or it was through different systems that we were already placing orders for. So Adult Social Caring Framework I has already got a general exemption. So yeah, I'd have to look into the data. I'll take that one away for you.
Thank you. Councillor Rose.
Thank you. Yes, agreed entirely with the point around the sort of consequence, the actiony thing. I think if we can build in what the outcome action is into the process when that's being reviewed, that makes logical sense to me. I think if 55% of them are in that situation, it's not a 1 or 2 people being an exception. So maybe when we get better numbers and we can work out what's an exception and what's not an exception, then that hopefully means you can start to spot where there is a problem and where there isn't a problem, etc. I think just a couple of points. Well, one thing that I said in a previous meeting, I don't remember it being minuted with hindsight, but as well as the percentage of invoices, it'd be really good if we had the percentage of value of the invoices. Is that 55%, 2% of total spend? How does that relate? And as we go through that sort of review, it might be useful to see that breakdown over time and see which things improve. And if we can bring the value way down without necessarily bringing the total number of invoices down, that's still a good win for us as a council without it maybe looking like it on paper. Ditto for, as you investigate, what percentage of that 55% is okay? Is 30% actually completely fine? So 30% should be our target, and we should be, checking that sporadically or periodically. And then the other thing just to mention was, I know we've had conversations in the past around PO approvals, which isn't mentioned here, but if an invoice comes in, then we ask them for a PO number and someone turns around a PO in a day. That sounds, it's got some alarm bells with it, I guess. Can we make sure that invoices that never get a PO, invoices that have a PO, but PO hasn't got full approval, all that sort of stuff is baked into the same review? I don't think it makes sense to look at that separately. I think those are all worth asking. I don't know if any of those are challenges or not. It'd be good to get your take on that.
Yeah, I take your point about that, the data, certainly the values of the 55%, and so that we can track improvement, because that will be important. I'm not sure how easy it'll be to track how quickly POs got approved on your last point, whether something's been turned around in a day. I don't think that's doable. But in terms of PO date and invoice date, that would give an indication probably of that taking place. So we could do a bit of analysis, I suspect. Something I'd look into.
Yeah, I mean, if a PO is signed off the day after an invoice, that's not necessarily a problem, because it might be an easy thing to approve. I'm not saying that managers can't make those decisions, but wary of, if we've had concerns in the past that maybe approvals aren't happening at all or happening appropriately, this is an indication that maybe there's a reason for that, which is, oh, I'm going to be told off having done the invoice early, and therefore can we get it sorted, particularly same day. At 55% same day or earlier, same day might be the other way around, in which case there's no problem. So there's always a bit of an overlap caution on that. But yeah, just more information, intel around the shape of the problem, and not just looking at it from a 55%, can we bring that number down, but can we actually resolve the challenges that matter underneath that?
Point taken. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Chair, something must be done. Big waves in the air. There's a problem. Is it a big problem? Is it a small problem? And we can offer contributions of ideas. But really, it needs a structured approach from those who actually know what it's about to come out with a solution that those people are telling us is a problem. And then councillors can contribute to a view about, this isn't quite the solution we want. At the moment, people are trying to suggest contributions to solving a problem, when the problem needs a comprehensive approach to bring up to the councillors, and then they can say, nah, not quite so happy with this, think something else should be done. Is it really a very big problem or just a problem? Without some of the forms of analysis, and you know, Councillor Rose has been going through some of the forms of analysis, but in a sense, it's your problem what the analysis is. It's his problem to see whether he's satisfied with the answers. But at the moment, we're double bluffing around here, I think.
Yeah, just to add, I guess we've got the 14 actions on the action plan. All of my questions are, when we're doing point 1 on that, can we make sure we've got enough detail that I can then do that bit? Because trying to give commentary on the rest, I don't have the information in front of me. So I didn't say that in what I was asking. That is exactly the same point I'm making, 100%.
Okay, Councillor Melly.
In terms of training, can you remind me what the difference is between essential and mandatory? Because I've forgotten.
The mandatory would be the training that somebody has to have in order to complete their job, their daily tasks.
And what's essential?
Yeah.
You need to do it, but you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it. Okay, trouble.
I mean, when we were provided our induction program, all the different trainings, some of them were essential, some were mandatory, and it came with an explanation of what the difference is. I just can't remember I can't remember now what the difference is.
Mandatory comes with the telling off. Yeah.
I'm just wondering why for the last 10 years, training for officers involved with purchasing has been essential but not mandatory, and whether and whether it should be.
Well, I think that's the point I was making in the report, that it is deemed currently essential, and you're right. That's the question: should it be mandatory? I'd have to take that away, I think, and speak to HR to see if we can.
Yeah, I think it just reflects a sort of an operational reality, really, around the turnover of managers and what people are doing. And I guess from a direct service point of view, they've got a lot of support services competing to give them mandatory training. So as well as Helen and I and the members team giving them finance training, they'll have Lorraine coming along to give them information governance training. They might have somebody else from Bryn's team giving them legal training. And so it's just maybe trying to reflect where it sits in terms of trying to look at what maybe a social worker is doing on a day-to-day basis and trying to fit in rather than, you know, force them to do something that they don't have time to do. But I think probably the overall point that I think we wanted to make from the report is it is a problem, and we recognise it's a problem, and we are determined to solve it, because it causes lots of other pressures and problems. So when we're in the middle of, as we are, financial pressures, having a really clear sight of what we are spending where and with who is absolutely vital. And if people are not using the purchase ordering system properly, then that muddies the waters for us trying to look at that. So we are absolutely committed to sorting it out. We won't have all the answers now, and we won't have all the answers tonight, but we will work through that and resolve it. And either our policy is not quite right and we need to change that, or our policy is absolutely right and we need to enforce it. At the minute, we're not really doing either of those. We're being a bit nice, aren't we, really, and trying to keep everybody happy. And so we are going to get our boots on and sort it out, really. Is what I'm saying.
You have a...
No, I mean, I appreciate that everyone is really stretched. They're struggling even, you know, under so much workload, they're struggling even to do their job. And there's so many different trainings that then people are asked to take time out to complete. But if this training, I mean, it's not for all officers, it's only for officers who are involved with purchasing. And if they're not taking up the training, and that is one of the causes of these problems, then making it mandatory might be, part of the solution.
And our other sanction is if people are not doing the training and persistently not doing the process right, we'll take away their ability to spend. That will cause other issues within that service, but that will be for that service to resolve. And they can resolve quite easily because you just go on the training and follow the rules, and then you can have your authority to spend back. So we do have some other levers we can pull to encourage compliance.
I guess not solution here, as per the points we've made already, but one of the things we've had is mandatory to then do something specific. So we can't attend this committee until we've had X. So maybe you can't do a purchase order for 5k unless you've done the training, and for everybody else it's essential, or as we chip away at it, or it's every 12 to 24 months. But during that onboarding, not everyone necessarily needs it straight away, but before they do certain things. So,
Okay. So thank you very much. I think you've suggested, very quick.
Very quick. Zooming back out on this. Yeah, sorry about that. Zooming back out on this, as the independent member said, are we comfortable with the fact from a finance perspective that it's very difficult if you don't have purchase orders and then you get an invoice to A, challenge the purchase order, and B, just to manage the cash flow and ensuring that, you know, there's not any, I don't know, fraud going on, for instance, for the sake of a consequence.
Not sure I follow the question.
Are we comfortable that there's no fraud going on?
That would be a bold statement to make, wouldn't it? But
It's just,
I'm confident we've got procedures in place that would pick it up if there were.
thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I think you suggested going back in March. We haven't got a meeting in March. It's either February or May, but it may be something we can slightly play by ear. And if a special meeting just on this in March would be useful, we can always arrange that. If not, February, if everything's suddenly absolutely fantastic, then we can leave it till May. Councillor Rose?
yeah, I wonder if, as I say, some of those actions flow on from other actions. If it looks like we'll be at the point where we've got a lot more information around the scale of the current problem and the steps towards some of those actions, then maybe we can have something in February, even if we don't have things following on afterwards.
Another progress update, yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, we keep in touch, I guess, and see how it's going and then decide where best to slot something in the new year. That'd be useful. Okay, move on then to item 10, which is Monitor 2, the key corporate risks. That starts at 393. And I think it's Helen and Debbie again.
Yeah, back to me again. This is the second monitor for the council's key corporate risks. I brought you the first monitor in September, so I've not had much of a gap between the two. This will give you an update of the council's 12 key corporate risks. They have been discussed at CMT for updates, and also executive have had an opportunity to comment on these risks. Just as a reminder, the key corporate risks are the risks that officers have determined as being the main risks or threats to achieving the council's objectives. There are lots of other risks, but these are the key corporate risks. So I won't take you through the report in detail, but paragraphs 15 to 21, that's where I've highlighted the changes that have been made in the updates. If you want to see those in the annex, which is Annex A, they're highlighted in bold. And I just mentioned that for this monitor, none of the risk scores have been changed this time. So I'll take feedback and any comments about the annexes.
Okay, thank you. I'll just invite committee members that have got anything. Councillor Fisher?
I noticed that the key corporate risk 8 has been downgraded from possible to unlikely. I have seen some correspondence which made me very concerned about that because of the certain issues that have been raised concerning matters relating to the local plan. Have we any further updates on that? You know, have you had correspondence with the forward direction to Fort Planning team about the progress of the local plan? Because I understood there was a bit of a blockage coming up.
In terms of it being downgraded, it hasn't changed for this monitor. It's you're looking at the between the gross and the net score.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's so the gross score is where without any mitigations, that's the level of risk, and then the net score is reflecting the mitigations. So actually that, having spoken to Neil Ferris, who's the risk owner, we haven't actually made an update to that risk this time because we hadn't got progress or sufficient progress for me to report back on.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further questions or points to make? No? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I wonder then whether we can just squeeze in item 7, which is the publication of internal reports, and then have a break. Which I think that's takes us to you, Bryn.
For everyone's assistance, this is page 351 of the pack. Page numbered 351.
Okay.
So, thank you, Chair. Yeah, members asked for a report to come back in relation to the potential exempting of internal audit reports. I'm not going to go through this in any great detail. I think the overall view, not only from our own internal audit service, but from all of those councils who responded to my request, and you'll see I went to everybody from the Scottish border down to the end of West Yorkshire. And there is nobody who publishes internal audit reports in full. It is very clear that some of them do not even provide them to members, which I find a little surprising. I think the point of this committee is to scrutinise those sort of things. But some of them don't even provide them to their members. The most common is a mixture of an overarching report prepared by internal audit with any highlights that they feel they need to bring in, or some kind of redacted highlight report where they can provide more detail but exclude details of where the particular cases are through. So I'm happy to take any comments, Chair, and I'll leave it to the committee to debate it.
Thank you. Do you have any comments or questions? Councillor Rose?
In absence of any other hands. Yeah, I guess one very quick question of clarity. What percentage of the people that you spoke to have a redacted version rather than the option we've got recommended here? Is it only one or two?
It's a minority. So I got, of the 19 emails I sent out, I got 10 responses. I think 1 or possibly 2 said they did the redacted version. For those who said that they published anything for public consumption, it was very much an overarching report prepared by the Internal Audit Service, setting out any key learning points for the authority to pick up.
Yeah, I guess the closest to fully transparent we can be is fully transparent with the bits that we can't be transparent about redacted. And then what we're going for is even changing the text that would be shown to people if we're doing a summary report or similar. So not so necessarily saying that we should go for a redacted option instead of what's proposed here, but I guess there's a distinction between them.
With the best will in the world, if you start to go down the redacted option, you fall back into many of the problems that arise from publishing them in the first place, which is that whether or not it's redacted, you're still getting into areas of details of services, which means that individuals can either internally or externally be identified, which means that they become reluctant to cooperate. The point about providing these reports to the committee on pink papers is the committee stands in the stead of the public in general, and it is your role to see these and to ensure that you, on behalf of the public, are satisfied with what's going on. So it's very much there so that you can fulfill that duty and ensure that if you've got questions about it, you can ask those questions and you can ask them in a secure environment, knowing that you can get an absolutely open answer.
Yeah, although you can only ask it to people who have an unredacted copy of it, so you can't get independent input from people where if you had a public version of it, you could say, what do you think about this? If that public version doesn't have any detail in it whatsoever, then that's a challenge. So there's a balance, obviously. We're not saying that we don't give detail. The detail is still there, but it may limit what you can get from the public, who are often a good source of independent thought on what we, or challenge to what we might be doing.
And again, that comes back to having perhaps a high level overarching report from internal audit on a lot of places. For example, we'll look at if you have a P1 action. That's something that, you know, would probably need to be highlighted. So, but rather than go down and say that sort of individual redacted route, you're better off having a single document that says we've done a number of audits in the last however many weeks. The following key points emerge from those.
Chair, if I could be supportive of the idea of not redacting things and not publishing everything, you've got to start on the basis, what is an internal audit report for? And its basic level, it is to improve the quality of management within the organization. And many internal audit reports are hitting into departments at a particular level. And that's where that issue arrives about identifying people and the complexities there. But for something to be a tool of management, that's not the same as saying it should be open to public scrutiny, because all organizations have internal processes. Local government is quite surprising in sometimes the amount of its internal processes it believes it has to be flogged for, because at the end of the day, you manage your senior managers by the competence with which they manage their departments. One element of which is the internal audit reports which are produced on how those managers work, which you see and key issues are highlighted to you. But even the audit committee, it's best not spending all its time looking at the absolute detail contained within an internal audit report. One of my hobby horses, which I've mentioned again, is how you extract from it, for the benefit of the audit committee, what the key issues are. And if you don't believe the key issues are the right ones, you then have a different kind of issue, which has been flagged up to you by the fact you're not being given the right information at the right time in the right way. But internal audit isn't responsible to every resident in the authority area. It's responsible to the management structures within the organizations, and stuff has to be brought down and down and down to a finer level. The audit committee looks at a level of detail, but should focus on the higher level issues within that. And I would not have seen any suggestion in a lot of public and charitable organizations that they would publish everything out to the public, because by publishing it to the public, it's not just to the residents you're publishing it to people with whom you're in contractual relationships and people you work with as well. So it's quite a difficult area, and redacting costs money and it isn't effective.
Okay. Any further comments? Can't say. I guess I'll just say that I think when we first discussed this, I was quite uncomfortable with the concept of the level of I guess sort of secrecy and the reasons for that. I think, you know, having had it fairly clearly explained why we're doing this, the reasons for it, and the sense, you know, I've been convinced that you know, this is probably the sensible, fair approach. I guess my only question in terms of that is whether we've got the balance right in terms of you know, the rights of councillors as a whole to see pink papers. And that's certainly something I'd like looked at and possibly changed in, you know, future rounds of the constitution review. You know, the right of any councillor to see pink papers or to sit in, you know, on meetings, things like that. I think that might help, you know, produce a layer of additional kind of scrutiny beyond this committee, I guess. Councillor Fisher.
I agree entirely with that. We want openness, we want transparency, but there's also the risk to the authority of publishing information which highlights weakness which other people may wish to exploit. I also strongly agree with the opinion that we should have all members should have the right to see pink papers. All of the authorities I've served on have always distributed pink papers to all members without any problems whatsoever, on the grounds that we're all members of the council, therefore we all have an interest in the council running properly. The other thing is we also get audit reports sent to us strictly confidentially by email on a regular basis, which obviously we're bound by the councillors' code of conduct not to spread any further. I don't see why that couldn't be done to all councillors, and they're all bound by the same thing. They all would at least have the satisfaction that whilst they're not in the public domain, they can still see them.
I think just to come back on that and the whole concept of distributing pink papers to everybody, Certainly my experience across the authorities that I've been at is where members can demonstrate a need to know, and that's the crucial test within the access to information regulations that apply to members, then pink papers are available. There's never been an issue. I think the danger you get is just blandly distributing all pink papers to all members, because often there isn't a need to know. So here we're talking about pink papers relating to internal audit reports, but there will be pink papers relating to HR matters, for example. And again, you know, if you apply the same principle, then you're running the risk of distributing very personal information around the authority. If any member feels they have a need to know on something, all they have to do is contact me. The procedure is there. So if, for example, there is something happening within your ward, you're not a member of the committee that's making the decision, but yeah, absolutely, I can understand the need to know. There's no question.
I mean, I would go back to the very famous incident concern, which Chris Stewart will tell you all about. It was the first public interest report back in 2014 or 2014, during the James Alexander presidency, and it was dealt leadership, and it was dealt with during the 2015 to 2019 session. And there was a massive row about who could see papers, and massive thing about redaction. And the council literally walked out of meetings because they were not felt they had the access to the information they needed to make a decision. So I agree, there is a balance in some cases where members should not have the right ones to use HR issues, disciplinary issues may not be appropriate. But on things like, for example, you know, matters relating to finance, there are plenty of other things where we have a legitimate, I think, right to know what's going on with the council.
I'll happily take it away. I'll happily take it away, Chair, and we'll look at it as part of the constitutional review.
That's Melanie.
Yes, sorry, I'm aware we're going, I suppose, slightly off topic. I was just going to add, there's been issues more recently than that as well. I mean, I was denied access to pink papers, not only for an issue in my ward, but it was an exec decision that I called in and still wasn't allowed to see the pink papers. So I'd say it's been an issue for a while. Yeah.
I'll say on that one, Councillor, if you can tell me what it is. You know, I think some of that then comes down to perhaps personalities. You know, from my own perspective, members generally will be able to get access to pink papers. I'm not averse to that. I think, as I say, you need to judge each case on its merits, but yeah, if you're a member, you understand that if you receive a paper that is exempt and therefore not for publication, you don't share it.
Yeah, I guess I've got a suggestion, not rather the formal proposal in a minute, but to continue on this discussion, I think we can set a principle that we are happy that councillors have a role of scrutiny in this organisation that is enough of a need to know that. Asterisk, maybe there are exceptions for specific rules, but in general, we're happy for our committee at least to have pink papers accessed by everybody else. It seems like that's a pretty clear consensus at least.
My one caveat on that is, under the constitution, it's technically my decision. So I'm, as I say, I'm happy to consider any other requests.
Principle that as a committee we're happy.
So could I offer an alternative view to you as a committee, which is you have a scrutiny function and you ask questions about things. You attend and sit in a meeting. If you share a set of papers, an audit paper with 40 odd people, 30 of whom are not sitting in the committee, 30 of them could start asking the same question in different circumstances and places. And the reason you have a committee structure is because you separate out the functions of groups of councillors and you put an oversight function into your committee structure, which is an area where you look at how those are working. And the audit committee, in effect, acts as an oversight function across your spending committees, and delegated to you as a group of councillors is a responsibility. You don't get rid of that responsibility by saying every councillor should look at it, but you may cause potentially some difficulties of lots of individual councillors wanting to raise issues where they have no scrutiny responsibility and they have no committee spending responsibility. So it's not impossible, and I can understand people's wish for for openness, but there are governance processes and control processes that might cut across that sensibly.
Thank you. I think we're getting slightly off topic because obviously this is not related to this paper. So, yeah, I think it's something to take away and perhaps think
As I say,
about.
I'll happily,
you know,
as members will be conscious, the contents of the constitutional changes report is not a substantial proportion of the documents that the Constitution is made up of. So it will be an ongoing process, and I'll look at, in the next tranche at the access to information procedures.
Councillor Rose?
Yeah, I guess just to close that, I'm not suggesting that everybody gets sent everything all the time for every committee, because I don't want that in my inbox anyway. But if people request it, then having that principle at A&G. Yeah, and a suggestion for an alternative option, recommendation, outcome, that when there's nothing that would need redacting, we're able to publish the report rather than a summary of the report. For me, that's one level more transparent than we're talking about here. Notwithstanding the point made around there might be corporate interests that are concerned, but I think transparency is key. There are corporate concerns in every KPI we publish loads of them. So I think that actually the principle of, if there's no reason to limit visibility of it or redact it, I think it should be the full report that comes through on the public papers. If there's anything sensitive in there, then we receive a summarized version of it. I'm much more comfortable with that than either extreme. It's a suggestion rather than a formal proposal, because I don't know what everybody else thinks, but
I think the only complication you get is, again, you come back to the amount of time it takes to sift out the ones where there's no possible issue, and those where there's perhaps an issue that falls into the law of unintended consequences. I absolutely, this is what we talked about the first time we had this discussion about, you know, we can happily look through the internal audit work plan and look to identify reports which would be publishable, and happily do so.
But what are the volumes of the total number that we need to be scrutinized in one go for audits? What's, if you're saying that we have to sift through and we have to itemize them, categorize them, if you're going through 3 and there's one that's a problem, that's easy. If it's 5,000, then going through each one individually. So that's the problem with redacting, is which of the paragraphs have information that you can figure out who it is without having names. What's the total number of things that we'd have to do that with?
That sort of question I can answer. I suspect there is a gentleman sat behind me who probably could.
Well, I'm generalist, but you could be talking about, say, 4 or 5 reports for each audit meeting. I think the problem we would then have is we would be making judgments about can this be made public or not, and get discussions with an person. To be honest, it started to require openness. My judgment might be different to understand to yours and everyone else.
For the microphone and public, that's about 4 to 5 per meeting, but the subjectivity of what is or isn't a problem would be the biggest challenge.
I think, I mean, I'm not going to die in a ditch either way. I think that's probably you know, that would not produce work for me, so it does matter in that sense. I guess the issue with that is, going back to the first stage of it, is the probability that people would engage with that process to the full extent if they thought that it might be public at the end of it. And I suppose the difficulty is that will it be public or not comes at the very end, but you've kind of perhaps affected how people interact right at the very beginning. And I suppose that's potentially the issue with that, you know, doing that side of things. Councillor Mandy?
Thank you, Chair. The thing is, there's all the openness and transparency are very important principles when it comes to democracy and local government, and there's all sorts of stuff that's made public which puts people off from participating in those procedures. You know, whether it's planning or licensing, there's always occasions when people don't want to object to a planning application or participate in a licensing hearing or whatever it is, because they don't like that they are identified personally, publicly. And if we go down that route as a justification for blanket rules to withhold information publicly, yeah, I'm not sure I'm convinced by that argument. I'm not really comfortable with blanket rules of withholding information. But yeah, it's just difficult to balance it's openness and transparency are important, but also financial prudence is important, and offers of time cost money. Yeah.
I think the only person that can probably balance that is Bryn.
And I think
it's the committee asking to be as transparent and open as we can be, and
I suppose the concept of openness and transparency is about ensuring that we publish the information that we need to publish, so that the council and the public are as informed as they need to be. It's not about publishing everything. I think that's a very key issue. I appreciate the desire to publish as much as we can, but it's not about publishing everything. Because if it were, then the openness and transparency regs would have said so.
I mean, my personal view is that it should be the other way around, rather than when there's information looking at whether to publish it or not, looking at, well, the default is not to publish it unless we need to. The default should be we publish it unless there's very clear reason why the public interest in withholding it is greater than the public interest in publishing it. If that makes sense. Default is to be open and transparent.
And as I say, I think the simple fact is that's not the industry standard. It's not the accepted way that local government considers this information should be distributed. The point about internal audit reports is you are the ones who assess them. You consider the content on behalf of the public. In the same way that Debbie will have lots of sensitive financial information that you will have access to, that the public don't. And it's the same principle that we are protecting the council's reputation and its systems and its integrity.
Sorry, talking about Debbie while she's right here. I think from my communications with Debbie, she tends to publish as much financial information as she can, and is as open and transparent as possible, and only withholds what she absolutely has to, rather than having a blanket rule of not publishing financial information, because some of it might be, I don't know, commercially sensitive or whatever.
Yeah, but as I say, the principle here is what you are dealing with is the internal audit reports intended to improve the internal systems. You are responsible for that, not the public. As I say, I think we would be a national outlier, would be my impression, if we continued. And there is, if we're the only one doing it, we're probably doing it wrong, is my logic on that.
Yeah, that's the question. Following up on Councillor Melly's point, and I think the point you made earlier, of the 10 local authorities that replied back to you, 2 of them did publish the reports, redacted or not. I think what the committee is expressing a view that they would rather be in the 20% than the 80%. And I think officers need to take that view on board and accept that's the view of the committee, which I think we could vote on it if you wanted to, but that is the view of the committee. Picking up the point about councillors, if the practice is that pink papers aren't given to all councillors, how are we ever meant to know that there's something in there that we could provide an opinion to a member of the committee or that does affect us? Because there's nothing in here, certainly in this section, that I would say is in any way controversial for a councillor to see. Going back to your point about, there are HR, et cetera. It should be, the exception is to not make it available, particularly to councillors, because that does sound very strange that we don't. And I think that's a view that seems to be quite widely shared. That's more of a statement than a question, by the way, so you don't need to answer.
I suppose to take those points in reverse, the advantage of the overarching report from internal audit setting out key issues that they've found and potentially audit reports that they've completed just as a list gives members the ability to see that and go, that looks like an interesting one. Can I see that? So rather than immediately distributing everything to everyone, if you're producing these overarching reports, which is what the majority do, if they provide it at all, That gives members the ability to see the subjects that are being dealt with, to express an interest in one or another, request the report. I will generally not have any issue with that. And then you're into that. I've read this. Can I ask a member of the committee to raise the issue for me? Coming back to the first point you raised, absolutely, I can see, you know, the feeling of the committee. I think the problem you have is, if you go down that route, you then essentially put yourself back in the position of people not necessarily wanting to cooperate as fully as they will, because there's the likelihood that things will be published, whether redacted or not.
On the former point, the other thing that is not just people spotting on a list and calling out is, if I have pink papers and I'm like, oh, somebody might be interested in this who's an exec or shadow exec member for whatever. At the moment, I've never shared anything with anyone, and rightly so. I've never desired to, but the ability to go, are we okay to just have somebody else cast eyes on it and not to have it like never can anybody else see it, does open up the ability to go, actually, this is something that probably somebody else should be aware of. And I just need to double check that that's okay before I do it. If we've got that broad principle, it helps with that. Well, cycling back 3 comments around to your previous comment on the same thing, which is, I don't think we are an outlier if we're part of a 20%. I think that, in fact, I'm not even suggesting, in my suggestion, that we just do full things with words redacted from it, which it sounds like a couple of people are already doing. I'm suggesting a compromise position between that, which puts us between the 20 and 80, somewhere in the middle-ish. And I think that reflects the fact that we do want to be fully transparent as much as we can be, but also that too much transparency, I'm not sure to what extent I buy that there'll be people who don't engage. There are people who email me casework and I say, can I get your address? They say no. And it does limit us. And that's every single part of council life that we have that. But also, we definitely do think there are some things more important than others, and audits and complaints and things like that should be more protected. But if we're saying, look, we're just going to close out the report and rewrite it if we think there's any reason for it to be sensitive, I don't think that that's an excess of transparency personally. Again, I haven't put in any real words and actual proposal there, but I think if that feels like the mood, but I don't know to what extent us 3 saying that we agree is the mood of the whole committee or not. But I'd be happy to propose something.
One alternative would be perhaps to produce a summary of the report with a conclusion at the end, and not actually publish any particular detail of actions and threats and such like, but say something like there was the so-and-so was assessed and found to have good controls in place and was awarded reasonable assurance, or, you know, a little bit more detail than that, but not the full detail giving what the actual weaknesses are, which could be exploited by people. Just a summary of the actual report briefly, you know, so like I do for a student, used to do for a student when I used to write reports. I didn't write out every piece of work he's done and the grade he's got and everything, just a summary and an overall conclusion of how effective the actual area was in terms of, you know,
is that Bryn's proposal on paper already? Is that not what your proposal is?
In essence, we are suggesting we don't publish the internal reports as a matter of course. If the committee would like a summary report, which is basically where we are, that could doubtless be arranged. And I'm looking at Max behind me.
In fact, we would we would recommend that we produce a summarised report of our audit findings and the opinion and key issues from those reports.
And that would be on white paper.
Yes.
Right, I propose we do that.
That was my understanding of the existing. That was my understanding of the existing proposal by Bryn on paper, was that we wouldn't get anything. We'd get nothing. We'd get a white paper.
So there'd be a white paper one that would go in the agenda, but actually you would still potentially get all of the
because it says include details of
so you can get into the nuts and bolts of it
without giving the detail of it. My preference is, if there's not a reason, if there's nothing sensitive in it, that we give the full report as well. I don't see any reason why not, and I think that's the distinction between the two.
So say you would receive the full report irrespective.
I know we would.
Yeah, as councillors.
And potentially other councillors.
Yeah, and potentially other councillors as requested.
But a member of the public might get 3-4 sentences versus a full report that has no reason to be hidden from the public in it in certain situations. Yeah. And appreciating the grey area where there might be disagreements over whether it should be public or not. I don't need to go around a circle.
So probably try and draw this to a close. We've got a proposal from Councillor Fisher. I wonder if anybody will second that. Councillor Burton's seconded it. So I think we're probably best just taking a vote on the proposal that we've got before us and seeing if there's a sort of, you know, at least a majority view of what the committee is, even if there's a sort of significant minority that might disagree. So then, could I see all those in? Sorry.
Can we just clarify exactly what the?
Go on, Councillor Manning.
Just wondering, so an item on the agenda is to resolve as a committee whether or not to exclude press and public when we come to discuss pink papers. So can we do it on a case-by-case basis, almost like that? Like if, you know, we all thoroughly read all these papers before we get to the meeting, and then if we as a committee decide that it doesn't need to be withheld, we can not resolve to exclude press and public when we discuss it. Is that a sort of way around it?
I think you're getting into dangerous territory of making those decisions on the hoof. The reason that we publish papers as pink in the first place is because we consider that they are inappropriate for publication. If we didn't think that was the case, then we'd be publishing them in the first place. I think we're back to what the proposal was, which was an overarching report that is public, that contains some information, and then all members getting, or members of the committee getting the pink papers.
So can I just check my understanding then? Because I thought when we get to agenda item 2 on exclusion of press and public, it's the committee who decides whether or not to resolve to exclude the press and public, and we are that free to make that decision. We're not compelled.
Yeah, no, you are absolutely free to make that decision. I suppose the codicil to that would be, and the consequences that may flow from that. So if we publish a report that a malicious agent then uses against us, then it comes back to the committee to, well, why did you do that?
Yes, and of course, when we make that decision on whether to exclude press and public, we do that on your advice. But that doesn't mean that in the future, if there's a report in pink papers that we don't think, you know, it would be unlawful, wouldn't it, to exclude press and public when we get to the agenda item if we don't think if we don't agree that there's a basis to?
I think the point becomes that if the advice that I'm giving you is this should be exempted for the following reasons, then that makes it perfectly lawful to remove the press and public from the meeting. So,
but if the advice is that it's justified to exclude press and public from that agenda item because of a blanket rule that says that it should be excluded rather than this press and public should be excluded from this specific agenda item, like they're two slightly separate pieces of advice, aren't they?
Well, we're not talking about a blanket rule that says everything is exempted. We're talking about an overarching report which provides some information to the public, but then pink papers distributed to members of the committee which have all the detail in them. And that's the approach that we would take. And as I say, if we come across internal audit reports that are so clearly publishable, I don't know whether that's actually a word, Chair, but there we are. Then we would have, I'm sure that Max's team would have no issues with those being published. But I think it's an approach that the council should be looking at to say this is not our default option.
So I'm not sure we're miles apart now, but Councillor Rose.
No, I guess I don't think that necessarily solves the problem if we're not putting the papers in advance, because people can't read it before turning up, so they can hear us, but they can't see what we're talking about anyway. But I just wanted clarity. I think we've already had a proposal and it's been seconded, so we probably should circle to it. But is the proposal that there's a summary that's in the white papers and that pink papers contains everything, or is it that there's a summary that should contain as much as we can give the public, or what's the actual proposal in detail, just for clarity before we vote on it, please?
The proposal that we give a summary which gives the key points that are within the public, allowable within the public domain, with an overall conclusion as to the effectiveness of the department in terms of its limited assurance, reasonable assurance, substantial assurance. Obviously, we don't want to give huge amounts of detail about specific areas of weakness, because that's the bit we've got to avoid. Where the council is vulnerable, and has weaknesses, people will try and exploit that. So I think we want to be basically a summary report about how effective it is with a conclusion at the end.
I guess just to give a 10-second speech against that motion is I think we should give anything that we can't not give. And I think that does sound like a too summarized report, but it's the proposal on the table, so we should vote on it. Just thought I'd explain where I'm at. Everyone knows my counter proposal is basically the same thing, but with more detail to the public. So we can vote on this and we'll either accept it or we won't. And if we don't accept it, I'll propose something, but let's just crack on.
Okay. Can I then see all those in favour? Okay. Against? Okay, so that's passed. Thank you.
Could I propose an adjournment, please?
Okay, we'll take I'll say 5 minutes, but appreciate we'll start again at 7:30. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think we're all back, aren't we? Yeah. Okay, so let's get going again. I think we're on to item 6, which is the report of the monitoring officer on suggested constitutional changes.
Sadly, yes, Councillor. So thank you, Chair. You've got before you, members, a number of parts of the Constitution which I've gone through. There are some suggested amendments. I apologise for the length of the documents. What I've tried to do is do you a track changes version followed by a clean version, so you can actually see where the changes are, but then potentially work on the clean version, because that's the one that it would end up being, and that's how it's easier to read that version. But I wanted you to see where the changes had come from. I'm unsurprisingly, Chair, I'm not proposing to go through all of the 10 appendices. I'm taking it somewhat optimistically, perhaps, that everybody has read them. I'm conscious that I know Councillor Melly has, and I know a number of others will have done. I'm happy to open it up for debate, Chair. That's what this is about. I think that my final comment would be, what I've tried to do with all of these is essentially put the council in the middle of the pack of what councils do. I'm not trying to be an outlier anywhere. I'm just trying to do it the way other people do it.
Okay, thank you. I think potentially the easiest way is if we start with any general points, overarching points people want to make before we delve into very specific points on why this line's crossed out. So, Councillor Rose.
Just suggesting we preempt that with any questions of clarity, if there's any questions of clarity, which I have one of, if that's okay.
Go on then.
We just mentioned off air about the council meeting rules flowing down to committees. Can I just ask the question of how much of the paper about council procedures and rules, e.g. timings, flows down into all the committees in the changes we've got here, please?
So all of them would flow down to all committees, with the exception of the planning committees and licensing, because they have their own specific rules.
So, for instance, that would mean that every committee is an hour shorter at maximum than its maximum currently is in the current proposal.
Yeah, unless you then get that 30-minute extension.
Okay, Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. So under the implications aspect of this, and this is broadly throughout the document, but it is exemplified on point 6, page 71, regarding a more focused effort for time for meetings with the 2.5 hour proposal, looking at a more inclusive and family friendly approach. As a direct quote, I was wondering whether that counted just underneath as an equalities implication that we could consider when it comes under implications.
I suppose it would, Councillor. It's not intended to be a specific equalities matter. It's simply the fact that I'm conscious most councillors will have something that they do during the day as a role, whether that be full-time councillor work or whether it be a day job, and then members have potentially another 4 hours of meetings on an evening. This obviously would at least ensure that members are not staying out until all hours. And I have to be clear, it's officers as well. But you will have officers who attend particularly council meetings who will have been at work since 7 or 8 in the morning and will still be at work at potentially 10:30 at night. And it becomes quite taxing for people. So it's just making everybody's life a little bit more towards the family friendly end of the scale. The one clarification I would like to make, Chair, particularly on the procedure rules, I don't know whether you want me to touch on this now or when we get to the individual documents. There is a reference at the beginning of that to Alderman. Sorry, I will use the clean version because that's clearer. So that's page 111 is the start of that. So yeah, 111 is the clean version, the page number 111. I would take you down to page 113.L.
Yeah.
Honorary alderman, honorary recorder, honorary freeman should obviously also be honorary alderwoman, alder freewoman. Recorder will remain the same title. An error on the part of myself and my team. We tried to go through and degenderize the whole document, and that was missed.
Do those terms have to be gendered at all?
Under the legislation, you are only given those two options.
Okay, right.
If we were open to use on older person, I would be quite happy to do that. And if the legislation ever changes to allow that, that will be fine. At the moment, under the 72 Act, it's alderman or alderwoman.
Okay, are there any further general points to make?
On the same point, I've heard Lady Mayoress used a lot. Is that a thing, or is it that Lord Mayor, or just while we're on the same bullet point?
Again, I would see no reason why it shouldn't be Lady Mayoress. And I'm quite happy that we go through the document and we revise it so that it's Lord Mayor or Lady Mayoress.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if there was any rules around what it should be, whether it's Lady Mayor rather than Lady Mayoress, and it's just a force of habit, or
certainly other places will have a Lady Mayoress. So I see no reason why we shouldn't have. It's not a legislative thing.
A general question rather than like a specific question about any changes. I couldn't see anything anywhere that explains what majority is needed for a vote to be passed. There's lots of references to if approved and that sort of thing, but nothing that says that it's a simple majority. It says, for example, to suspend standing orders, the motion will be, put to a vote, and if passed, then, lots of things that say if approved, then this will happen, but it doesn't say if approved by a simple majority, either in each individual case or anywhere. It doesn't kind of say votes will always be by a simple majority anywhere either.
There are some very limited circumstances where it's not a simple majority. One of them would be rejecting the budget. One of them comes to appointment of aldermen and women and freemen and women, where it needs to be a 2/3 majority. Pretty much everything else is a simple majority. I'm happy to include that in the comments at the beginning, if that would be helpful for people.
I think if it's repeatedly going to say what happens if a vote is approved, it needs somewhere, maybe in the comments at the beginning, it needs to say how a vote is passed, how a vote is approved, by what majority.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you. On the subject of voting and implementation, I just want to clarify in terms of sort of the time length that this would take in order to bring to the council and implement. And just to be absolutely sure that I don't get my British and American politics mixed up, there is nothing more than a simple majority of the council required. There's no other aspect. Wouldn't need to be unanimous or anything in addition.
It's simple majority.
Thank you.
Councillor Fisher.
Throughout it refers to cities or parishes. It doesn't mention towns because, of course, Haxby is a town, so it should.
I mean, to add that
minor issue, but
if sticking to the generality, and it's really the variation of the point you just made, which is the politicization of the Lord Mayor. If the Lord Mayor exercised a casting vote in a very difficult situation. Now, in my days long past now, we used to have status quo ante, and that's not allowed now. I believe, not acceptable in local government, which meant whatever it was that existed before, the honorific figure, the Lord Mayor, would not cast a vote to change that. And I know it doesn't cover all circumstances, but if as is worded at the moment, you have a tie between the parliamentarians, i.e. relating to the Speaker in the House. If you've got a political tie, and it says the decision will be made by the Lord Mayor, it could be argued, and it's not my field, that he is being politicised in a role where he is holding an honorary role, and where that might become particularly significant if it is after an election and before the new organisation comes into existence, what the role of a Lord Mayor is, who, for example, is no longer a councillor. and you get some quite difficult potential political issues. I'm not saying there's any way around it, but when I read through the documentation, I felt there were two issues there. The honorific, which is the Lord Mayor, and the casting vote, which is the Lord Mayor, and a free exercise of his desire, which underpins the current wording.
I'm not sure that I can take that much further, but there is no principle for us in local government that says that the chair of any particular meeting should generally not have the casting vote.
Are there any more general points to raise? So when we did the constitution review previously, there was a cross-party working group. I think there was 2 members from each group on that. I guess why haven't we done that this time? Might that be a way of getting through all of this? Because I'm not sure the best approach is for us as a committee to sit down and go through line by line, rather than 2 members from each party sort of going through together, seeing where the points of agreement, disagreement are as previously. Whether that might be a better approach than us trying to do this now. And secondly, I suppose, what did you see the process from this point being?
Okay, so in terms of the working group, I will freely admit that's not something that I was made aware of. I think in any event, the process would have been, I come up with what I come up with, and then it goes to whoever, whether it be a working group or whether it be the committee. I suppose rationally, by doing it this way round, we are potentially circumventing a number of months of additional work. Because it comes to the committee in the form that this is my suggestion. The committee is then able to consider what my suggestion is and make a decision as to whether or not it supports it or whether it wants to make some tweaks, amendments, significant amendments, and will then bounce it on from here to full council for approval.
Okay.
So
did you see this going to the next full council in November?
it depends on what members say, is the answer. If members are generally content and there's some tweaking around the edges, we can probably do that. If members want more significant changes, probably not, because the amount of time it will take to do that is likely to exceed the amount of time I've got before the papers are published for full council. So,
okay. Councillor Fisher?
I strongly support the idea of a working party. I was on the last one. It was a very, very worthwhile exercise. We identified areas, in some cases where we didn't agree, and we thrashed out solutions which were suitable to all members. And there were very, very few burns of contention left at the end of it. I think, a working party of a small group who could meet, talk things through, is absolutely vital.
That's a person.
I'd say that I agree with Councillor Fisher on this. I think it's such an important thing to get right that I don't think it's something that we should be doing really at this late stage in this meeting when it's such an important thing. And that's not to say we can't talk about some of the things that are in it, but I think a working group that's fully representative would be a good thing.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I think the challenge of it not coming to November's council is that it then has to come to March, right? That's the next full council where it could be considered. It's a bit of a long grass, but at the same time, I'm looking at the number of comments that I've got, the comments dotted around and how far we're into it already. And we're looking at specific bullet points. And I'm trying to envision what we can achieve in an hour and then how much discussion will be left for full council to deal with. And even things like, do we need to put Lady Mayoress in there or not, might be something that then becomes a 20-minute conversation, even if it's already, people have got their mind made up before they talk about it. I don't see how we can get to a point in November's council where everybody's happy and we're coming into the meeting going, yeah, we're all just pre-approving. I think a working party can do that. So yeah, I'm happy to formally propose or second that entire concept of let's take this away to a future ANG, having worked through all parties being happy and to iron out some of those points rather than trying to hash out some suggestions here. But I appreciate that we shouldn't let it slip. Certainly not beyond March. So we need to be giving comments sooner than later if we want things to be considered.
I will offer one observation, Chair, which is that yes, you know, if the next meeting after November would be March, that is of course your budget meeting. We don't, right. It shows where my head is at the moment. So many different things going on. Yeah.
That's why it's a long.
I think that there's an advantage to having a longer gap in that group can work through all these issues in good time, and potentially, you know, the second tranche, the third tranche, the 10th tranche of changes, and those which, you know, we've mentioned tonight generally, but also need feeding in, and, you know, potentially take to that March meeting everything, I guess, possibly, having worked through it all. And so, yeah, I don't think there's any great loss to missing November, because in reality we're only really losing one full council meeting at which it would be relevant, but gaining 5 months worth of time to sort of work through it.
I think there's one other advantage, which is that I think that there will be a heated discussion around the length of meetings, around the 2 motions, 4 motions and stuff. Doing it this way is a much calmer and constructive and positive way of coming to a consensus across all parties. The Constitution is something that is apolitical and affects multiple years future. I would better for us to do it in a happy way than, and I'm not saying that's party political, but even councillors on the same team might have different opinions of things come council. So I don't know how we form that working group. I guess defer to the chair on the right way of putting that suggestion together.
Yeah, and I think the starting point, I guess, will be what we did last time, which I think was 2 members from the 2 main political parties. So
Yeah. There are 2 party members.
yeah, so perhaps two members from each side.
I suppose the question I would then ask is how would you capture minority views within that conversation?
I was on that working group last year, despite not being on Audit and Governance Committee. So I last time the committee, again, I wasn't on it, did agree to open it up to other parties that weren't on the committee and other people who weren't on the committee.
Okay. Yeah, I think I wasn't on that, so I'm not sure how it works, but I'm presuming that however it works relatively well. So probably use that as a model and then take views from people that are on it as to what did and didn't work and tweak it if necessary.
Sense from Councillor Fisher's enthusiasm, he would be volunteering.
You know,
Councillor Rowe?
already damaged.
Yeah, I guess when we decide exactly how we're doing it, we should take into consideration independent members of A&G and independent councillors. Whatever we come up with, there has to be a way for them to appropriately feed in and participate, even if they're not necessarily structured in that way.
Councillor Melly.
So I'll be suggesting a working group going away, looking at all of this, and then bringing it back to audit and governance, and then taking it to full council. Because if it's not going to full council to March, I think there is time to do that, isn't there? So we're not talking about giving it to a working group to take it away out, you know, and then the committee not having a chance to look at it again and it not being looked at publicly again until full council.
I think it would have to come back to audit and governance, and I guess it would aim
there is time to do
28th of February, A&G.
I'll just check the date of council in March. Because obviously, just from a timing perspective, what I need to ensure is that if it goes to an A&G meeting, there's sufficient time between that and the publication of papers for the council meeting. Because what I don't want is to come to audit and governance on the 8th of March, for example, for a council meeting on the 10th. So I just need to check to make sure that we've got a suitable gap.
Being a novice, I'm not sure, but there may be a possibility of us changing the date of the audit and governance meeting to fit in with the council meeting in that case.
Yeah, I think that would be a sensible thing to do.
Chair, in my ongoing role as an external bureaucrat, it would be helpful if what comes back isn't the same kind of thing that's sitting here. In other words, if you're trying to reach decisions, exclude anything which isn't contentious. And say, you know, we don't think that there is any need for people to concentrate on that 137 pages. And here are the 7 decisions we'd like you to choose, because we think there's a range of views that could be held on those things. And here are 2 or 3 things where we couldn't even get internal agreement among ourselves. So we recognize it may end up and say even at full council. So divide up the task, get rid of the stuff that needs to be dropped back in the long grass, which there is a lot already here. And whatever the working party even focuses on, it should be the areas where there is reasonable scope for discussion. You bring to write the English, good, bad, or indifferent, but have the people look at the policies and the issues in that working party. Don't go through it page by page by page, and bring something back here which is concise, identifies where you've got agreement, but you recognise that agreement might be challengeable, you want to have it, and identify the areas where you haven't got agreement. Don't try and force an agreement if you haven't got one, but clarify the thought processes and just turn it into a process of getting to an outcome, not keep going over the whole thing again and again.
Yeah, and I certainly think that, you know, there's huge swathes of it that nobody would necessarily have a disagreement about. There are big changes in it that potentially, you know, could be bones of contention. Yeah. I don't know what people think about the bigger changes. But, you know, hopefully they'd focus on those ones and trying to get a compromise if there's different views. And that's probably easier with a small group that can sit down and hash it out than a big group with, you know, time pressures and all the rest of it. So I think that's probably a sensible way forward. So, Councillor Fisher?
I think the key point, it needs more time than we've got time for tonight. And that's all there is to it. We can't possibly go through this and agree everything tonight. So let's get a working party of people, particularly interested in constitution affairs, and get them involved.
Again, totally agree with Councillor Fisher. I think to do the, you know, the city of York and everyone right by, we need to give it a good amount of time, which we don't have. It'll be a terrible thing to rush through it.
So I think we're all basically just kind of agreeing in circles, which is very nice. But have you got a time?
I suppose the question I would pose to members, and I'm more than happy to spend time. I'm sad, so I'm more than happy to spend time looking at the Constitution with other people. You've got effectively 5 of the annexes of the Constitution here. And I think I would not be suggesting that we start with any more than that at a working group. I think doing it piece by piece rather than presenting you with a revised 700-page Constitution would just be mind-numbing for everybody. There are a couple of appendices to the report, 9 and 10, which are the contract procedure rules, which I'm conscious that Debbie's team have amended so that they are actually slightly tighter. I don't know whether members had any particular thoughts on those or whether you were comfortable to consider and approve those so that Debbie can then get on with implementing them, or whether you want to include them all for subsequent review. I suppose I would also include within that the changes to staffing matters, because again that's just about tightening some of the procedures on staffing matters. But it's down to the committees to whether you want to agree some or to just move all of it to a working group. Over to you.
Councillor Healing?
Debbie, is there any great impact to finance if it's not done today? It's done in 5 months' time.
Only that we've been wanting to do it for quite some time, and they are just tightening up. Many of them are changes I could do myself under delegated authority. I can make small changes to the contract procedure rules myself, so some of them I could do. I think just because this overarching report was coming, we thought it would be sensible for you to consider them kind of in the round. I don't think there's anything particularly controversial in the contract procedure rule changes. They're just kind of common sense changes to tighten up a few anomalies and loopholes, really. But it would be helpful if they could be agreed, but equally, if you don't want to, that's fine.
What page is that? Does it start on? 227.
Chair, could I just say, it's a variation I was saying earlier about separating out the wheat from the chaff. There probably are issues on some of those supporting appendices where people might have views, but would it be useful to actually agree some of them, because the issues are not fundamental at a strategic level? When you've got some quite big strategic issues you want to focus down on, you're being encouraged to if you would, to agree these 3 appendices. You've had a chance to look at them. Are there any of them that any of you feel very strongly, you just don't want to accept that? But otherwise, are there any bits you can agree to put through, and therefore they're off the list of things that you have to focus on in the next couple of 3 months?
So there's some changes to Staffing Matters and Urgency Committee. So the clean version is Annex 6, which begins on page 175.
So I think on principle, I would be happy to approve those sorts of sections because they're quite discrete parts of work, and it's fairly clear that they're sort of tidying up exercises. If that helps get something off a plate, then I'm personally happy to do that. I'm also happy to take views from the committee. Councillor Melly?
On the Staff Matters and Urgency Committee, I only had one thing, which was that in paragraph 2.1, you proposed inserting the phrase chief officer, which I just didn't think was necessary because chief officers is already in that sentence.
Where?
Yeah, and in terms of the
sorry, are you in the centre of that paragraph?
Yeah.
So so it is functions related to chief officer staffing matters for the chief officers listed at paragraph 3.4.
Oh, I see.
Perhaps,
Okay.
perhaps I should put a comma in the middle and that might separate it out.
Right. Okay. Fine. It's not like it's really controversial. I just struggled to read that sentence. That's all. And in terms of procurement rules, from memory, I thought it was on the forward plan for January. On the work plan for January. It's not anymore. Has it been altered, or am I just completely misremembering?
For the contract procedure rules?
Yeah.
I didn't think we'd put it on the forward plan actually, but
well, after the meeting, I'll go back and look at past agendas. I thought it'd been on there for January.
Right.
And I have discussed with colleagues who are interested in in procurement rules. Yeah, who were wanting to look at it before it comes to the committee. So they haven't done that ready for this committee. That's all. Yeah.
I mean, again, ultimately, what they have to happen is if you agree them now, they still have to go to council. So this isn't the end of the process, but at the end of the day, it's a choice for yourselves. If you'd like to separate out what would be effectively agreeing that Annex 6, Annex 8, which is the associated changes to the officer employment procedure rules that flow from those changes to the staffing matters and urgency, so that the wording ties up between the two of them, and Annex 10, which is the clean version of the contract procedure rules. It then goes to everybody for council next time round, and everybody can dive in at that stage.
I'm happy with that. I have a question about page 204, 2.1. A group qualifies for an assistant if. I wasn't sure whether it was all of those, whether it was A or B and C, or
sorry, I have used legal drafting, which tends to confuse everybody, including lawyers. What you can do is read an and at the end of the first line, the first qualification.
Okay.
So the way a lawyer would draft it is you get an assistant if A, B, and C, or A and B or C. So it would be clarified out like that.
Okay. And in terms of C, what if there isn't a majority group on the council?
If the majority group does not seek a political assistant.
I mean, what if there isn't a majority? What if there was two groups had 20?
Then it's just the two largest groups, as long as they both meet the 10% criteria, which is.
It says one of which has to be the majority group on the council.
So sorry. There will always be a majority group, whether it's got a complete majority or whether it's just the largest group. I'm happy to change that to largest group if that makes if that clarifies it for everybody. No issues at all. Let me just make a note of the page.
At that point C, I wasn't completely sure why it was being added, like what the purpose of it was, what's prompted it. And also, I thought maybe it could be more clearly worded.
It's fine. It's being added because it's one of the qualifications that essentially if you have the two largest groups and the majority group chooses not to have a political assistant, the minority group doesn't get one either. Now, whether either side would ever envisage that would be the case is a whole different question.
So why is that a requirement?
Legislatively.
Oh, I see, okay.
It's just one of those clarification points that I needed to put in just so that everybody understood.
So could I just get this clear?
Sure.
In the last council, the Lib Dems had 21, Labour had 17.
Yeah.
Both of us got political assistance, but if the Lib Dems had chosen not to have a political assistant,
nobody would get one.
that's okay. That's just clarifies it.
Okay, so we happy then with those two appendices with the changes?
No, please. I would far rather talk.
But if it had been the other way around, because you're using a specific example of the last administration, if Labour had declined, the Labour group had declined having a political assistant, also the Lib Dems wouldn't be able to have one. Because it says at least two groups are seeking an assistant, and they were the only two groups who met the other criteria.
But 110.
Yeah, they
had at least 5.
Yeah, so there were only two groups that had more than 5. So in order for the other, they would both have to want a political assistant in order for the other to have a political assistant.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Got you there.
So it's not just that smaller groups only get an assistant if the largest group gets an assistant. In the case where only two groups meet the other eligibility criteria.
No, it says that two groups are.
Yeah, so in that specific example used of the last administration, you use the example of if the Lib Dems had declined to have a political assistant, they wouldn't be eligible. So it's also the other way around. If Labour had declined to have a political assistant, the Lib Dems also would be able. That's how it's written here. Is that what the legislation says?
I will have to go back to the specific wording of the legislation. It's probably the best way for me to do this. Okay. If you are comfortable subject to that, then I will dig that out. I will circulate it round so that everybody can see exactly how it's structured in the political regulations.
Okay.
Because everybody needs to read those.
Go on, Councillor Healy.
Okay, so what we're saying is that we're happy to sign off officer employment procedure rules. And not yet. And the other one was
it's
start from Matt.
SMU, officer procedure rules, and the contract.
I wouldn't do the contract one today. Not if you need to see.
Okay, so then.
Yeah. Well, no. It's just if it goes to full council, it'd just turn into a bloodbath. Or no, there will be less considered debate there than possibly you may receive here.
Okay, Councillor Manning.
Yes. Sorry, before we do agree to approve the officer employment procedure rules, I do have 2 more points, questions, whatever. Through all the documents you've gone through and replaced chief operating officer with head of paid service.
Yeah.
Apart from 3.1B, which
that will be a typo on my part.
Yeah, but before we approve it, we just want to update that. And then
sometimes you go completely word blind when you're going through it for the 4th time.
Oh, I'm sure you've been dreaming about the Constitution, like you've been seeing it in your sleep, yeah. And the other thing was paragraph 11.3, where there's still some gendered language where it says he or she, and all other gendered pronouns like that have been removed from the rest of the document, haven't they? I think.
Sorry, where was that paragraph?
On the track changes one, it's page 195, 11.3.
11.3. And is that the officer procedure rules?
Yeah, still an officer procedure rules. I think he or she just.
Yes, I will.
Replace with they or something. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with Annex 5 and 6, and from memory, having lost all of my notes as discussed before, there weren't any major points on the following 2 annexes or the following 4 annexes from me. So I think there might be some offline things to iron out. It would be very good to get the direct statutory link for that bit. I think actually the wording at the moment suggests if anyone else is seeking an assistant, which means that I guess the Greens could have sought an assistant, even if they weren't eligible. So it'd be good to see the exact wording in statutory, make sure it marries up. But
So the qualification was 10%. So in the last administration, they only had 3 members, which would be less than the 4.7.
But if they sought one, even though they weren't eligible, would that enable somebody else to have? I just think let's make sure we match the statutory wording. That's fine. But other than that, I have no objection with us taking those 3 sets of annexes to council. There'll be some other typos to tweak between now and then probably as well, but fine by me.
Okay, thank you. Are there?
So, which ones would you like? Would you like the staffing matters and urgency, the officer employment procedure rules, and the contract procedure rules, or are we excluding the contract procedure rules, Chair?
I'm happy with all 3. Maybe that we.
I don't have I've got no axe to grind on this one.
So, please.
Right, so just to clarify, the staffing matters and urgent, oh no, that's on the sec. Yeah, no, I'm happy.
Okay, so you're all happy.
You're looking slightly puzzled, councillor. Yeah, effectively it is 6, 8 and 10, which are the clean versions of those documents.
8, public participation protocol.
No,
Appendix 8.
There's a difference between an annex.
So annex 8 to this report rather than annex 8 to the constitution, which is the public participation rules. Yes, I appreciate it. It starts to get.
Annexes 5 to 10. But I always refer to the non-clean version because that's the changes, and it's the changes where
both versions will go, but just for everybody understanding which documents we're talking about now.
Okay. But if we're happy to send any other comments around small tweaks through to Brid offline,
please
I'm very happy to propose that we take 5 to 10 through and the rest we defer to a working group.
Yeah, I think ultimately it comes to full council as a report from A&G anyway. So I think there's a route for changes to be incorporated before it goes there.
Absolutely.
If we're happy with that.
All I would ask is any minor tweaks that people spot, could I get them in the next few days? Because obviously we've got to sort it out. We're going to council in the council papers. And I'll apologise for you seeing them again in the council papers.
Okay, so we're all happy unless anybody says anything. I don't think we need to vote, do we? We just want to vote. Okay, somebody propose.
I propose that we actually formally move that we approve annexes 5 to 10.
With the specific things we've discussed.
The specific things, subject to the minor amendments that we've made to
that members may wish to submit.
And a working group to resolve.
A working group to resolve issues relating to other annexes.
Okay. Happy to do that.
Okay.
Right.
Second.
Resecond just in case.
Okay. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Right.
So that's about 2/3 of the papers that you can now move past.
Right.
Councillor Chair, you've got.
Just an informal request, if we can circulate by email the working group breakdown for us to be happy with, that'd be great.
Yeah, we'll arrange that.
I think if we get the terms of reference from the last one and make that the starting point. So, okay. So next item then, I think we can move on, can't we?
Yeah.
Item 11, the work plan. So I think then we've agreed potentially to add to the February 2024 report back from the working group, I guess, if that gives enough time.
Yeah, so I've had a look and you've got 28th of February and then the council meeting in March is the 21st. So there should be plenty of time to then do any tweaks and reference it on.
And the purchase orders somewhere to fit with what's going on. Those were the two additions. Okay, are there any other comments on that? No? Okay, we move on then to item 12, and thank you for your patience. Oh, sorry, before we do item 12, let's do item 2. Yep. Right, so just before we start item 12, if we just go back to item 2, which is exclusion of public and press. So obviously, as we've discussed, annexes 4 to 7 have been recommended to be the public, who I think have almost all left, be excluded. Sorry. We're just resolving to do that later, I'll say. Could I then see all those then in favour of that? Okay. Any against? Okay. Okay, so we've resolved to exclude the public at that point. I'll let you know. We'll go as far as we can through this agenda item before we close the public section. Okay. Thank you. If you're able to present the reports.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll keep this fairly short. So this is our usual progress report. It sets out the internal audit and counter fraud work that we've completed since the last committee meeting in September. There are 3 annexes to the report. The first, Annex 1, covers internal audit work and details the reports that we've finalised in the period. So we finalised 4 reports. We have a further 5 audit reports which are still in draft. And we also set out the current priorities for the ongoing internal audit work. So basically the work that we're doing now, doing next and doing later in the period. As I mentioned at the September meeting, we've been subject to an external quality assessment process. We have to have one every 5 years, and that review is undertaken by the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors. Their report is attached as Annex 2, and you'll see that the outcome was very good. And then finally, the counter fraud work and other activities that we've undertaken are set out in Annex 3. I'm very happy to take questions on the report.
Okay, thank you. I'll just ask if members have any questions, and obviously up to the pink papers. If not, no. We're happy then to move into the private sessions.
Are you all right?
To those watching on the webcast, we'll end the meeting here. We won't come back. There isn't any urgent business to come back for. So thank you for watching. Yeah.
Thank you. See you later.
Thank you.